Hello, everyone. So I think we'll jump right in with our discussion question. So today we're going to talk about what can delay the overseas processing of an application. So what do you think makes applications delayed when they're sent to the visa office? Yes, yes, for sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Anything else come to mind? Yeah, for sure. Country conditions or the visa office itself. Maybe that particular visa officer is the only one processing applications and they get sick. So the applications are put on hold. Something simple as that could be a possibility. Yeah, for sure. And that's something to keep in mind too, is that some visa offices do ask for additional documentation before they proceed with processing. So I know Turkey does. They ask for updated Schedule A, I believe, information. And they also ask for a document about dependents as well. In particular, dependent children, males, they want their case history information back as far as they were 15 years old. So yeah, they may be specific documentation that each visa office will ask for after it receives the file. What about on the part of the sponsors? Is there anything that could cause a delay in processing their application? Yeah, for certain. Yeah, in particular, when we're talking about a group of five. So when the sponsors are assessed, if they have received approval to move forward and the application's been sent overseas, if one of those persons withdraws as a sponsor, it's like they've started right from scratch again because they're no longer a approved group of five sponsorship group. So it has to start over with a brand new group of five, even though four of the five have already been assessed. As soon as you change one person out, it affects the application. The only way that I can suggest to groups of five to avoid that is to always have more than five people listed on the application because they want a minimum of five. So if the minimum of five are there because you've had 6 people or 7 people sign the application, then it should still move forward in processing with just the removal of one of those persons. Unless, of course, they were one of the main financial contributors, then, of course, it would restart with a new assessment based on where's that money coming from that should have been from that person. Anything else on the part of the sponsors that might affect processing of an application or the overseas processing of an application? So we can't rely on the refugees themselves to update information for the visa office overseas. We should ensure we're doing it as sponsors. So yeah, if we don't provide that information and IRCC can't reach the refugees because they don't have the most current contact information, that will definitely delay the application. Now, we did hear one person mention the country conditions or the visa office abroad that may impact the processing of applications overseas, but what about the country of asylum itself? Can it have an impact on the processing time of overseas applications? Many of you may not have done many applications that have reached the overseas processing stage, and that's understandable. So I'll just share with you one of the things that can affect processing overseas related to that country of asylum is their exit visa process. So when that comes to mind, if I'm talking about exit visas, how do you think that can delay the application? Yeah. So a lot of countries, they don't look fondly upon people who enter irregularly into their country. They consider it an illegal entry, and they call it an overstay of visa. And so when there's an overstay of visa, they usually have fees that they charge. And until those fees are paid, the exit visa will not be issued. And in some cases, a certain amount of time in detention is required as well, up to 30 days possibly. So each country of asylum is different in how they issue exit visas and what fees they will charge for overstay of visa. And it can be quite high. It can be, hundreds of US dollars per day of overstay for each family member. It's not unheard of that thousands of dollars have had to be paid to a country of asylum. And some countries, they also have corrupt officers, and they want to be paid a bribe before they will issue an exit visa as well. Now, what about the overseas screening? How do you think that can affect the processing time of an application? Yes. But in particular, crimes that do have an equivalent crime here in Canada are what is most difficult to get through. The crime of blasphemy or possessing a falsified document in order to gain entry into another country. Well, that is considered, a crime in those countries. And the falsified documentation is considered a crime in Canada. But it is understood that trying to seek protection, that may be a step that refugees have to take to find safety. And so it will just play a part in the processing of the application, the delays. But blasphemy laws or crimes in other countries that are not equivalent in Canada, they won't be addressed at all. So those won't affect the processing of the application, the timing of the application. When it comes to medical screening, if the individual is found to have a communicable disease that would prevent them from being admissible to Canada, like tuberculosis, until they have received treatment according to Canadian standards to the satisfaction of the authorities, it will delay the processing of their application until they are deemed to be physically well enough to travel to Canada. And so they won't be a medical threat to Canadians. Any one of the family members who is found to have admissibility concerns will delay the entire application. So if you have two applications that are linked together, say you had a mother, father, and two minor children, and then, two older children who are above the age of 22, but they still live with their family members and they're linked together. If one of those adult children is found to have an admissibility concern, both applications are delayed until that admissibility concern is resolved. Now, sometimes IRCC will ask the principal applicant if they would like to unlink the files so that they can be processed separately, and the family that's not affected can continue with processing. I think sometimes that happens, but unless that decision is made, then it'll all be processed together, because Canada wants families to stay together. Ultimately, family unification is important to Canada. So unless the family asks for that to happen, they won't process them separately if they've been linked together. Any other thoughts or comments about what can delay overseas processing of an application? Yes, if the credibility of the applicant is called into question, or of the sponsors even, it will definitely delay the application. Yeah. Yes, for sure. So if the reviewing officer has some concerns following the interview and they haven't made their final decision and they give a procedural fairness opportunity for the refugee to respond to their concerns, that can delay the application based on how much time is needed to add additional evidence to put before that reviewing officer. So if they've asked for, 30 days, and then they ask for another extension for more time, which they can do before responding, then that obviously will delay the application processing. So as was mentioned earlier, I'll just summarize. Some of the things that can delay the processing of an application is whether or not it's complete or filled in correctly. If there's anything that the visa office requires in addition to the application that's been submitted. Of course, we talked about recently credibility concerns. If they deem that there might be something untruthful or missing or omitted from the application. We talked about the country of asylum itself not issuing the exit visa for reasons of overstay, or maybe the person has to remain in detention for a certain amount of days before exit visa will be issued, or until fees are paid. Those can delay processing of the application. Travel arrangements. If they can't get flights out, that's going to delay the processing of their application and their eventual arrival to Canada. Whether they need travel documents could delay. So if they don't possess an active passport, then Canada will need to issue a one-way travel document, which it's a minor delay, but it's still part of it, right? It's a delay. Any admissibility concerns of any of the applicants, the principal applicant or their dependents, that will delay the application. And of course, as we experienced a few years ago, a global pandemic delays the processing of applications. Yeah. So those are a few things to keep in mind as you wait and wait and wait, and the refugees wait and wait and wait for news that they have been approved and that they will be arriving in Canada. We have to be transparent and open with them to understand that it can take 3-4 years currently for them to come to Canada. So private sponsorship is not a fast process to get them out of their, difficult situations where they may be suffering. So it's better to be straight up and honest with them about how long it takes, and that it may take longer than other applicants, because oftentimes they'll compare themselves. Well, our application got submitted before this family, and they applied a year after us, but they're going already. Why is that? Well, each case is unique, and each family member has to be individually assessed for admissibility, and maybe there are concerns with the admissibility with some of your family members, or maybe they entered the country of asylum regularly through a border crossing, whereas your family entered irregularly, and you have overstay fees that haven't been paid. You never know, right? So each case is unique. Even though they're entered into the system on a first in, first out basis, things happen based on a case-by-case basis that can delay the application. Okay, so with that, let's move on to Module 7 summary. So when it comes to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, there are specific departments that often interact with sponsors. However, the key ones that you will likely communicate with are the Resettlement Operations Center in Ottawa, also known as ROCCO. And ROCCO handles the initial stages of application processing. They review the applications for completeness, and assess sponsor eligibility and capacity, and case-specific follow-up requests. Next is the Resettlement and Asylum Strategic Operations Branch, known as RASO, and they manage the SAW agreement, including processing applications, managing allocations, changing contacts for the SAW representatives, and funding the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program. For all correspondence related to the planning and coordination of travel, including pre-notice of assessment transmissions or the notice of assessment transmission, blended visa office referred and joint assistance sponsorships, and loan contribution requests, you would email the Movements Coordination Team. And lastly, we have the Resettlement Services Assurance Team, also known as RSAT. They work on the post-arrival, so after the refugees arrive, to monitor private sponsorships. And they ensure the PSR program is functioning properly and handles inquiries related to post-arrival issues. We also have Client Support Services. And this is a department that handles anything to do with immigration, not just private sponsorships. Private sponsorships is a very small portion of immigration. But Client Support Services deals with permanent residence cards, interim federal health, and related inquiries. So when you go to the Contact Us web form, you would select the most relevant topic from the list for your inquiry. And as you can see here, there's an option for getting help in a crisis, emergency, or vulnerable situation. And you should always notify IRCC when there's a change in contact information, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, or adoptions, changes in location of residency or country of asylum of the refugees, concerns about the protection of the refugees, so if there's a pending deportation, or if you're adding dependents or withdrawing an application. And so yes, there is the link for Client Support Services. And so the Guide to Private Sponsorship of Refugees program provides clear instructions and links for where to send or get information to and from IRCC. So this is the link to that particular web page in the guide where you'll find this information. And when you open this page, you'll find information related to processing times, case status inquiries, both inside Canada and outside, and withdrawals, 1-year window or add dependents, changes to group of 5 or community sponsor groups contact information, and updating the principal applicant's case information or contact information. When the newcomers are scheduled to travel, there are organizations who assist them at the port of entry. And sponsors can contact these organizations directly if they have concerns that are related to their arrival at the airport. So in Vancouver, there is Community Airport Newcomers Network, also known as CAN. And Calgary has Catholic Immigration Society, CCIS at YYC. In Montreal, there are reception services at the Montreal Trudeau International Airport. And Toronto Pearson International Airport, we have polycultural, immigrant, and community services. So for overseas processing, when the refugee's file is forwarded to the visa office overseas, they are processed according to a first-in, first-out priority. And the exception to this is when there's a public policy decision made by the Minister of Immigration to prioritize particularly urgent situations. So whenever there is a change to the refugee's contact information or circumstances, such as relocating to another country of asylum, the Visa Office Abroad should be notified as soon as possible. And you can contact the Visa Office Abroad directly or use the IRCC web form. And you'll want to notify the Visa Office of any additional dependents to include on the application. This is vitally important to ensure the family can travel together. Withdrawing of an application should be for a valid reason, not simply because the sponsors decide they cannot come up with the required funding. and you'll notify Rocco if you wish to withdraw the application. Preparing for the interview is also an important step in the overseas process, and sponsors may wish to review the Preparing for the Interview video posted on the RSTP YouTube channel to learn more about how refugees can prepare. And the immigration medical exams, these are only to be done by a list of approved panel member physicians. So the Visa Office, or IOM, the International Office for Migration, will typically contact the refugees directly to arrange for the appointments. Criminality and security screenings take time in order to complete a thorough investigation. These screenings may be the reason why overseas processing gets delayed. When it comes to procedural fairness, if a visa officer is leaning towards refusing an application based on the information that has been provided to them, refugees will receive a procedural fairness opportunity to see if they have anything additional to add to their application. For example, details that have not already been provided. This might occur at the interview or following the interview via email. The principal applicant may ask for the case to be reconsidered if there is new evidence they can provide before the deadline provided. When it comes to refusal decisions cannot be appealed or reversed. However, a case may be reconsidered when additional compelling evidence is presented to the officer overseas. And sponsors may wish to make an access to information and privacy online request, an ATIP request it's called. There's a small fee involved, and sponsors or the refugee's legal representatives should specifically ask for the officer's case notes to be included. And the web link for that ATIP request is included here. Once the application for permanent residence is approved by the Migration Office abroad, in some cases, a pre-arrival notification, known as a pre-NAT, may be sent, and that's approximately 1 month before travel. So sponsors can verify they are prepared to receive the sponsored refugees. The Notice of Arrival transmission, also known as the NAT, is an official email sent to sponsors once travel arrangements have been made. It's typically received within 10 days to 3 weeks before arrival, and provides flight details and any urgent medical follow-ups to be done soon after arrival. Keep in mind, sponsors should not sign a lease for permanent accommodations at this time, since travel arrangements sometimes change. So the International Organization for Migration, known as IOM, as you've learned, this is the organization which is funded by IRCC to help refugees get ready before they travel to make it easier for them to start life in Canada. IOM conducts pre-departure information sessions where they will learn about what to expect for the resettlement to Canada. The COA session, so the Canadian Orientation Abroad session, typically takes place after the refugee's application for permanent residence is approved by the visa officer, as close to the departure date as possible, so the information they receive is fresh in their minds. However, in some cases, the session may take place right after the interview or near the medical exams. And if travel is unsafe, IOM adapts by sending mobile teams or holding remote sessions by Zoom or phone. And the Orientation Canada, O Canada app from IOM is a great tool for refugees to learn about Canada. It's available in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Dari, Kiswahili, Somali, and Tigrinya. It gives important and accurate information about Canada, available supports and services, and more. And refugees can use it anytime, anywhere to learn. When refugees arrive, their sponsors should provide an orientation as well. Sometimes local settlement agencies also offer orientation sessions. There are also important steps that newcomers must complete with their sponsors, some of which we'll highlight, but this is not a full list of tasks. So sponsors should always refer to their settlement plan and the post-arrival requirements guide when preparing for the arrival of sponsored newcomers to ensure they are doing what is expected as it relates to post-arrival activities and responsibilities. So you'll want to ensure that they know where they are located. So where their house is, take a tour of the neighborhood, including library, parks, grocery shopping, and things like that. Explain about and provide the emergency numbers for 911, how to contact police, how to contact their sponsors if they have any immediate needs, and look after any immediate medical and dental attention, including prescription renewals or follow-up tests. Be sure to introduce all members of the sponsorship group and demonstrate use of appliances and bathroom fixtures. Not everybody uses these facilities in the same way all around the world. Explain financial disbursements, so how much money they can expect to receive, how to budget the money they receive, help them understand all about Canadian currency, using debit cards, internet, banking, etc. Explain how to use public transportation and accompany them for the first time. Explain the newcomers' rights and responsibilities, Canadian laws, and sponsors' expectations. Sponsored refugees will need access to many things upon arrival and may require help from their sponsors. But the more they can do on their own, the more confident and independent they will become. Make sure the newcomers have updated the Canadian address for where their permanent residence card can be mailed to. So help them search the canada.ca website for change of address online service. And as we mentioned previously, you should update that change of address information for every family member, even the infants, to update the change of address online information for that infant as well. Because we've noticed if the address information is not updated for each family member, then some of the permanent resident cards will arrive and some of them won't. You want to be sure that they've applied for the social insurance number, which is no longer a card, it's a form that they receive. Now, some point of entry airports do have a kiosk, and you can apply for the SIN number there. And it's also important to have that SIN number if you expect them to be receiving the Canada Child Benefit. And you'll want to make sure that they are using interim federal health basic coverage until provincial health is received. Now, supplementary coverage is available throughout the 12 months of settlement. But you must use a healthcare provider that is registered and approved to provide IFH services and products. Sponsored refugees cannot submit a personal claim for reimbursement. The doctor will not charge the newcomer. The services are paid to them directly from Medivay Blue Cross. And you'll help them to apply for provincial health. Now, some provinces do have a 3-month waiting period for new residents. However, this does not apply to privately sponsored refugees. They are exempt from that waiting period. And be sure they have working cell phone for Canada and are aware of the high costs of making long-distance calls. Advise them to use WhatsApp or a similar internet-based messaging services to call overseas. Have groceries stocked in the fridge for the first few days, including cooking instructions in their own language as needed. And have appropriate clothing for the colder weather in Canada. Explain what each item is for, how and when they should use it, and talk about thermometers for knowing how cold it is outside. Register children for school or daycare and arrange for their immunizations as necessary. When it comes to settlement agency services, local settlement agencies can provide information on programs and services available to newcomers, such as provincial and municipal benefits, low-cost dental care, trauma counseling, and many offer services such as getting their education and employment credentials assessed to see if they're comparable to Canadian credentials, registering for training, upgrading education, language assessments and classes, trauma-informed counseling, employment skills training, and social activities. When it comes to sensitive issues, it's important to talk to newcomers about their health and the services available in Canada. In particular, talk about the fact that going to the doctor or hospital is free. Do not be surprised to learn that health issues may be concealed from you as sponsors. This happens for many reasons. Sometimes the newcomers mistakenly think it will cost money, and they may already feel like they're a burden on their sponsors and do not want to ask for more. I highly encourage you to learn more about trauma-informed care. Since the persons you are sponsoring may have experienced trauma, and you will want to know what to expect and how to avoid triggering bad memories of what they previously experienced. So I have some resources for you to check out. This link here is for a course on mental health provided by the Canadian Centre for Victims of Trauma. And the next link is for a YouTube video that is quite lengthy, but it contains valuable information on this subject. Mental health is also something that should be discussed and normalized as much as possible, because in some cultures it's considered taboo or a stigma to speak about health issues or mental health. And this link is for a Facebook post that contains a video called The Courage to Continue. Let's Talk Mental Health. And it has a specific focus on newcomers to Canada. And this final link is for an online course offered by CAMH, which is free, and it was designed for settlement service professionals. However, I encourage you to enroll in it because the information is also relevant for private sponsors. Now you have learned about culture shock, but we're going to go through what culture shock is. So newcomers' emotions may shift dramatically due to culture shock. Ensure that volunteers assisting with settlement are aware of how culture shock impacts emotions, behaviors, and responses to certain situations. So pre-arrival, the newcomer is often worried about when they will receive news about their application. They may be living in fear, in hiding, and still facing human rights abuses or confined to a camp without access to services. On the way to Canada, newcomers have mixed emotions. They're happy to be relocated to a safe place, but may also have fear and excitement about what to expect. They may also be sad to be leaving family members behind. Now, the honeymoon period will begin at the airport, and there is typically exuberant joy when reunited with relatives. They're so happy to meet their sponsors, to see where they will live and rest and find peace. And they'd like to know where to get the food that they're familiar with and what their neighborhood is like and how to get around. Culture shock can happen at any time after arrival, and it's the realization that arriving in Canada is not the end of their struggles. So difficulty to reach their family members who are still overseas, and the separation upsets them. They struggle with feeling happy while their family is still in dire situations. And they may be struggling with speaking or learning the language, and often they're healing from trauma. And also wanting to work, but facing barriers. A deep sadness still remains over the continued conflict in their home country, and they may even become angry for unknown or known reasons. Perhaps over limited options for work. They may experience racism and discrimination. But over time, newcomers' emotions shift as they learn to navigate the new way of living, which is different from what they have known. But they adapt to the new life they have here in Canada. They improve their language skills and can carry on a conversation and ask for the things that they need. They make connections. Some go back to school or take specialized training to achieve their career goals. They have hope for the future. Some graduate and receive interviews in the career field that they wanted, and may even get hired. Lasting friendships and circles of support outside their sponsors develop, and they begin to explore beyond their local community to see the beauty in Canada, and they may even learn to enjoy winter activities. So that's it for Module 7. Here again are the important dates to remember. Okay, so that is the end of our session today. Thank you so much for participating, everybody. Best of luck on working on Module 8.